Okay, so we've got 15 minutes for questions, and I see lots on Slido, so well done, everybody. The first, let me start with this one. The first question here, oh, we've got Lisa up. Good, we can see you, Lisa. Thanks. This one's for you, Lisa, but we'll be happy for John and Jackie to add any into it. COVID was very different as a disaster because there was such a long crisis period with top-down command and control. Did governments take the wrong lessons from this about the role of community in recovery? It's a big question as a Melbourne person.
It is a big question, and you know, it probably changes over the course of time. So when the pandemic first came through, all of the narrative was around disease transmission. And so I was really being annoying and getting in there talking about, we are going to have to talk about the longer term impacts of this and how do we support resilience and how do we support recovery. And of course, in the long train of these events, response and recovery is happening at the same time. It's not as clear. So I would suggest that in the first instance, no, there wasn't engagement with the role of community groups in being part of decision making, and there was a lot of advocacy going on behind the scenes. But over time, they became more open to that, and there was avenues for us to provide pathways for that. Sometimes that went well, and other times, as we know, it did not go well.
Thanks for that, Lisa. John, did you want to?
Yeah, I guess the thing to add to that was a lot of community self-organised regardless. So, you know, we did see that. So again, one of the principles that we sort of spoke about, community-led recovery. Yeah, a lot of places just got on and did stuff. And so I think that's certainly something that we learned as well.
You're good. Okay, our next question is this is a broad question, and I might put it to Jackie first. How can you build resilience within communities if they're still recovering from multiple disasters? And we're seeing that obviously a lot.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think just stepping back a bit, one of the questions we often get is, oh, that community's just had a disaster, you can't go and talk to them, or you can't do something with them. And that's not actually a good approach. Yes, you need to be sensitive and careful, but at any stage of disaster processes, you can work with communities and there are lessons for resilience. We build resilience by learning and new skills and doing different things through every process before, during and after. So there's opportunities to build resilience at all of them, but we have to be careful. We have to match those opportunities for building resilience to the capacity of the people at that point in time. So, you know, the classic example we see is quite often we see a lot of funding for programs and planning and rebuilding coming in really soon after disasters. And yet all the work tells us that a lot of the people worst impacted aren't in the psychological space where they can make decisions about their future yet at that point. Now, they've still got chances to build resilience at that point by understanding and learning how to process what they're experiencing. But what we shouldn't be doing is demanding, we think you should be making this decision right now at this point, even if you're not ready for it. That's not the way to build resilience during disaster.
Lisa, did you want to add to this? Yep.
Sorry, there's a little bit of a lag on the unmute button, so I'm toggling from one to the other.
We can hear you great, thanks.
Okay, look, I would just add that you know, what we see is that for people who belong to community groups, they do tend to fare better over time. Even though you do see conflict and all sorts of things going on, there is something about being connected to others for gaining support, information, resources, and so on. And so when we look at communities where many people belong to community groups, we see a higher level of resilience across the whole community, even those who are not part of those groups. So there's a spillover benefit of that connectedness and trust and reciprocity. However, we also know that the people who belong to many groups, and they're typically the community group leaders, you know, the person who's the secretary of the football club and organises the speaker at the service club and is on the committee for the school and so on, those people do tend to experience burnout, and especially at these times of elevated demand. So I would suggest that when we're looking at communities in these circumstances, really focus on community leader support and have a look at creating spaces for succession programs and for sharing the load, and being really conscious of that.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, be led, be guided by what the community is telling you. And, you know, some will say, yeah, we aren't ready, we can't do this. And others will say, no, actually, we don't want to go through this again. So what can we do to start sort of thinking about it? I think the other thing is also they're also going to be thinking about, like I said, like not just treating the disaster as this kind of point in time, but what do they bring into it? And I recall two places that I had done a little bit of work with in Victoria after some fires 20 years ago. You know, one was a really vibrant community, strong local government, really active. And so fires were still burning, and they were talking to me about, this is how we're going, this is what we want to do, this is how we're going to do things. And you could just see they were really sort of focused. Whereas you go over the hill to the next one, which had multiple disasters, a whole lot of dysfunction around its governance, you know, amalgamations and all those sorts of things. And they were just struggling. They were like, we actually don't know what to do now. So I think that's the thing. We just got to remember what communities, what local governments are bringing into the disaster.
Okay, there's a few questions around relocation. I might put this to you, John, first, and then we'll see if others want to add. Given that we rush into the decision to rebuild post-disaster, is now the time to start having difficult discussions about, rather than rushing into rebuild, that maybe we encourage governments and communities to relocate as part of our recovery system? And I'm going to add on to this from like a wellbeing lens. Are there any particular implications around that planned relocation or not unplanned relocation?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll answer the second part. So as a geographer with a special interest in connection to place, yes, you know, this is the other part that we don't understand well and we haven't studied well, is place connection, place identity. And so that shapes people's decisions, you know, and we all know that, about where they live now, but also shapes their decisions around whether to prepare, or how they're going to prepare and to recover. So there's a significant impact there. Red Cross internationally has done a whole lot on displacement, and really the principle there is, you know, it has to be voluntary and it can't be forced. I think you have to start having those conversations, because you don't want to be. We have them post disaster, and so again, we were talking about this at lunchtime around. You end up with that sort of decision around policy on the run, and we all know how great's policy on the run. It's good, isn't it? So that becomes sort of problematic. What it also does, and we saw this was particularly some of the media reporting, and you might have more on this, but you know, people in the Northern Rivers sort of waiting. So what's going to happen? I need to make a decision. Like, I need to know what I'm dealing with. So people will make decisions about their recovery once I've got all the, if I've got all the sort of settings in place, they may still not rebuild for 3 or 4 years, and that's okay because they've actually made that decision. But if there's a whole lot of uncertainties, it makes it really hard for them and has that sort of impact, you know, on their well-being. So getting that right, starting that conversation early is important, but also have to have like you know, really understand the all of the consequences. So, you know, if you are flooded, this might mean your life might be a bit of a mess for a while. Like, and we're not talking a couple of months while you just muck it out. You know, we're talking potentially years and that sort of thing. So it's really complex, and yeah, we have to be starting to get a handle on how we have those conversations.
Lisa or Jackie?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. This was the issue of where people might rebuild or choose to stay living was a really emotive issue after the Black Saturday bushfires, when we were spending a lot of time in communities and talking with people. So we deliberately built it into our study design to capture the experiences of people who stayed within community and those who relocated. And we had a look at their wellbeing outcomes 3 years later, because so much of their decision making was we don't actually know what's going to be better for us as a family. And what we found was the wellbeing levels were pretty similar, but for different reasons. So the people who stayed living in community, they really valued that sense of connection to place and people, but their wellbeing was also being undermined by all of those disruptions that are still happening in the years afterwards and the reminders, and also the loss of their social networks because people moved away. For those people who moved away, they had a fresh start, and that was really helpful, but they didn't have a sense of connection to community. And so really it was a different experience, but provided I think it's an informed choice, at least provides people with a bit more direction about what might be best for them.
And I'll add just a brief thing which follows on from Lisa's use of the word choice. To me, that's the critical thing for wellbeing outcomes when we talk about relocation. If you have choice and agency, you're likely to be able to support your wellbeing. If a choice is forced on you, that is going to really risk reducing your wellbeing and threatening recovery of that wellbeing after disaster. So we need to be really careful when we start talking about we will make people do something. We need to ensure that people are given the means to make the choices that are right for them and their lives, while also being aware of the impacts those choices have on others.
And I'll probably just say here too, choice is not just about an authority telling people to move. It's also about, and we saw this with the floods and the bushfires, about the rental market being completely overwhelmed and people being forced out financially from the communities that they love. Excellent. There's some really good questions. We're not going to get through them all. There's lots of specific questions about the dashboard, and they will be very easily answered. And I encourage people to just email the regional wellbeing team, either myself or Greta or Jackie, and we can answer those questions specifically. Because we're here talking about measuring wellbeing, I'm going to ask a measurement question. If I can find it again, because they keep moving around the place. It's gone up, I think. There was a question about measuring what matters uses the Australian Disaster Resilience Index as the metric for a resilient and sustainable nation. Is this the best national indicator?
I'll start because I don't think any indicator's the best. I think they're all really valuable. And I think that is one very valuable indicator. So, you know, we think it's good, we think it should stay, we think it should be updated, which there's an update process happening at the moment, and our team's actually been asked to be involved in that, which we're really excited about. We need that, and we need other indicators. It's a great headline one.
Yeah, it's the one we got. and there's a lot of work that went into getting it to where it is. And I think in a current day and age, God, I sound like an old man there. We expect everything to be perfect the first time round. I mean, generally because we're being told everything is perfect. It was a big piece of work to get it to where it is, and we know there's some challenges and it may not be easily used, but that's why it's being updated. So I think good start, and I'm sure particularly with what we've been seeing generated, it can only improve.
Lisa?
Oh, yeah, look, I think the key thing to remember is that when we talk about indicators, they are indicators. They're not intended to capture everything. And so as long as we remember that, the thing with wellbeing and resilience measures is there are so many things that contribute to these factors, and they are really hard to capture in a comprehensive way. They're also not always sensitive to change. So if we're trying to use these indicators to measure the effectiveness of interventions, for example, we've got to recognise that sometimes these are not the best measures because there is a tendency to return to base levels, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But also the intervention might be just targeting one aspect that is not captured by that indicator. So I guess I'm just talking from an evaluation perspective to be cautious around what measures you use for what purpose. But I think there is always value in having indicators in place.
And I was just going to sorry.
I was going to say, you can have this might be our last comment, John.
Oh, okay.
No, you do it.
No, I was just going to say, I think it also prompts you to it prompts you to think about the questions you want to ask a community. And I think that's the important thing. And again, I recall something I was involved in where I ended up having a conversation with the officer in charge of the local police station. And he said, I am seeing all this risky behaviour. I am seeing increases in domestic violence. I don't know what to do about this. And it was just a whole other story about how it got to me. But he had such presence of mind to kind of go, something's not right here. So even if you're using these measures as ways of prompting questions to people who might know the answer, then that's a good start from starting to think about program and intervention design.